In 2004, a Navy fighter pilot chased an object that had no wings, no exhaust, and no visible way of staying in the sky, and it outran his jet like he was standing still. The United States government spent the next 13 years insisting that the footage of that chase did not exist. Then, in 2020, the Pentagon quietly admitted it was real, and yet, 6 years after that, they still claim they have no idea what it was. For 70 years, the official answer never changed. There is no such thing as a UFO, whether balloons, swamp gas, the planet Venus, a nervous public seeing what it wanted to see. Anyone who said otherwise was a crank, a hoaxer, or a fool, and the men in Washington made certain everyone knew it. But somewhere in the last decade, the story cracked. The same government that had mocked believers for 2 generations started doing something strange. It began releasing videos, funding secret programs, building new offices with budgets and badges, and dragging its own intelligence officers in front of Congress to testify under oath. This is not a story about little green men. This is a story about what the most powerful government on Earth has quietly admitted, what it still refuses to say, and the widening gap between the two. This is what the government knows about aliens. The leak. It started, like most modern secrets do, with a newspaper. On December 16, 2017, the New York Times published a story that should have been impossible. For years, the Pentagon had been running a shadowy program to study unidentified flying objects, and it had cost the taxpayer $22 million. The money had been quietly steered through the defense budget by the Senate Majority Leader at the time, Harry Reid, and most of it flowed to a private aerospace company owned by one of his wealthy friends. The program had a name straight out of a spy novel, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. A career intelligence official named Luis Elizondo stepped forward to say he had run it, and that he had resigned in protest because the government was not taking the threat seriously. Now here is where we stay honest, because honesty is the whole point. The Pentagon would later muddy this story. They admitted the program existed, but they disputed whether Elizondo had ever actually been in charge of it, and the $22 million, it turned out, was technically attached to a slightly different, more boring-sounding program name. The believers and the skeptics have been fighting over that detail ever since. But strip away the alphabet soup, and one fact survives intact. The United States government had been secretly spending real money to study UFOs. At the exact same time, its spokesmen were telling the public there was nothing to study. The tapes. And the leak came with receipts. Alongside that 2017 story came something no government had ever officially confirmed before. Gun camera footage. 3 short, grainy, deeply unsettling videos, recorded by Navy pilots through the targeting cameras of their own fighter jets. The first was filmed in 2004 off the coast of California by the warships of the USS Nimitz Strike Group. The other 2 were captured in 2015 off the East Coast by the USS Theodore Roosevelt. In them, you do not hear actors. You hear professionals, some of the best-trained aviators on the planet, slowly losing their composure. There's a whole fleet of them, one pilot says, his voice climbing. Look at that thing. It's rotating. These are men who have flown into combat without flinching, and you can hear the exact moment their understanding of the world stops working. For 3 years, the Pentagon said nothing official. Then, on April 27, 2020, in the middle of a global pandemic when the entire world was looking the other way, the Department of Defense did something it had never done in its history. It formally released all 3 videos and confirmed they were real. The objects in them, the Pentagon said, remained, quote, unidentified. They claimed they were releasing the tapes only to clear up public confusion. But think about what that sentence actually means. The most advanced military on Earth had recorded objects flying through its own restricted airspace, had handed the footage to its best analysts, and after years of study, the only honest word it could find for them was a shrug. The pilot. To understand why those tapes terrified the people who saw them in person, you have to go back to the beginning, to the deck of a warship 11 days before anyone aimed a camera. In early November of 2004, the cruiser USS Princeton was sailing with the Nimitz Strike Group off the coast of California, and it carried one of the most advanced radar systems in the world. And that radar kept seeing things that could not be there. The senior operator watched as objects appeared on his screen in groups, sometimes 5, 6, 8 at a time in formation. They were hovering at more than 80,000 feet, an altitude where no aircraft on Earth was supposed to be able to fly. The crew assumed the brand new system was broken. They ran the diagnostics. They rebooted it. The radar came back, cleaner than ever, and the objects were still there. For 2 weeks, day after day, they appeared, hung in the sky, and dropped. And here is the part that should make your skin crawl, because it is measured, not imagined. They fell from 80,000 feet down to 20,000 in less than a single second. Picture what that does to a body. A human pilot inside a machine that stopped that hard, after a fall that fast, would not black out. He would be pulped, crushed into the back of his seat, his blood driven into his legs, his bones folding like wet paper. No living thing we know of could ride inside one of these and survive. And the objects did it again, and again, and again, then simply hung there, motionless, as if gravity were a rumor they had decided not to believe. On November 14th, the Princeton finally had 2 fighter jets in the air nearby, and it vectored them out to take a look. One of them was flown by Commander David Fravor, a man with decades in the cockpit and nothing left to prove. As he approached the coordinates, he saw it. Below his jet, the ocean was churning, a frothing white disturbance the size of a jetliner, as if something just beneath the surface were boiling the sea. And hovering directly above that disturbance was a smooth white object shaped like a giant Tic Tac, around 40 feet long. No wings, no rotors, no exhaust, no markings. No way, by every law of flight he had ever learned, that it should have been in the air at all. Fravor did what fighter pilots do. He went in. He spiraled down toward the object in a wide descending circle, and the object seemed to notice him. It began to rise, mirroring his arc, climbing to meet him like a partner in some impossible dance, always keeping the same distance, always staying just out of reach. Fravor got aggressive. He cut across the circle, diving straight at it to cut it off. And in that instant, the object reacted. It snapped to a stop, shot away, and was simply gone, accelerating, Fravor later said, faster than anything he had ever seen in his life, faster than he had words for. The churning water beneath it went calm. The ocean was empty. But the story was not over. Seconds later, the Princeton's radar found it again. The object had reappeared 60 miles away, in less time than it takes to read this sentence, and it was waiting at a location called the Cap Point, the exact, classified spot in the sky where Fravor's squadron had been secretly ordered to fly next. It had not just outrun a fighter jet. It had known where they were going before they got there. A second pilot in the air that day, Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, saw the same object and confirmed every detail. And a third jet, flown by a pilot named Chad Underwood, went up shortly after and finally captured the thing on his targeting camera, the grainy footage the world would not see for another 13 years. These are not anonymous voices on the internet. These are decorated naval officers who flew combat missions, putting their careers and their names on a witness stand to tell you the same impossible story. The witnesses. And here is the detail that should keep you up at night. The Tic Tac was not a one-time event. 11 years later, on the other side of the country, it was happening again, and this time it was happening constantly. A Navy pilot named Lieutenant Ryan Graves flew F-18s off the East Coast out of Virginia Beach, and starting around 2014, as his squadron upgraded to new radar, they began seeing the objects every single day. Not once. Not as a strange story to tell at the bar. Every day, dark gray cubes inside translucent spheres, holding completely still in hurricane-force winds, or rocketing against the wind at impossible speed, staying airborne for hours with no visible means of propulsion and no heat signature from any engine. Pilots got so used to them that the sightings stopped being exciting and started being a hazard. One jet nearly collided with one. The pilots began filing official safety reports, the same forms they would use for a near miss with another aircraft, because that is what these had become, a routine danger in American airspace that no one could explain. The men in the cockpits were no longer asking whether the objects were real. They had moved on to a darker question. What were they, and why was no one in charge doing anything about it? The admission. For a long time, stories like these lived only in the testimony of individuals, easy to dismiss one at a time. Then the government put it in writing. On June 25, 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence delivered a report to Congress that the public had been promised for months. It examined 144 official encounters between U.S. military personnel and unidentified objects, stretching back to that day off the coast of California in 2004. And of those 144 cases, the entire American intelligence community was able to confidently explain exactly one: a single large, deflating balloon. The other 143, it could not explain at all. Read that again. The combined surveillance might of the United States, every satellite, every radar dish, every analyst with a clearance, looked at 143 encounters in its own skies and admitted on the record that it had no answer. The report was careful with its language. It said there was no clear evidence that any of these objects came from somewhere other than Earth, but it also said plainly that it could not rule that out. And it noted that a small group of the objects had shown acceleration, movement, or signatures that no known human technology could produce. The government was not confirming aliens. It was confirming something almost stranger, that it had lost track of what was flying over its own head. The office, a government that truly believed there was nothing out there, does not build a permanent office to keep looking. But in 2022, that is exactly what happened. The Pentagon established a new agency with one of the most bureaucratic names ever invented, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Its job was to detect, track, and identify anomalous objects, not just in the air, but in space, underwater, and crossing between all three. The fringe topic that had ended careers and ruined reputations for half a century now had its own director, its own budget, and its own letterhead. The question that got people laughed out of rooms had officially become a matter of national security. The testimony. And then came the day the floor dropped out. On July 26, 2023, a congressional subcommittee held a public hearing, and the star witness was not a tabloid psychic or a man in a tinfoil hat. He was David Grusch, a decorated 14-year intelligence officer, an Air Force combat veteran of Afghanistan, a man who had worked at the National Reconnaissance Office and had been chosen to represent it on the government's own secret UFO task force. He was, in every sense that matters, an insider's insider, a man trusted with some of the nation's deepest secrets. And under oath, with the federal penalty for perjury hanging over every single word, he said the unthinkable. Grusch testified that the United States had been running a program, hidden for decades, to recover and reverse engineer craft of, in his exact words, non-human origin. He said his government was in physical possession of vehicles that did not come from this planet. And then he used three words that no official had ever spoken under oath in the history of the Republic: non-human biologics, bodies, or whatever passes for them, recovered from inside the wreckage of these craft and hidden away from Congress, from presidents, from the public, for generations. But the morning headlines all left out the single most important word in his testimony: secondhand. Grusch was careful to say he had not personally seen any of this. He had not touched a craft. He had never stood in a hangar looking down at a body on a table. His testimony was built on interviews with roughly 40 other witnesses, people he said had direct, first-hand knowledge, people who came to him frightened, some of whom he said had been physically threatened to stay silent. He was relaying a secret, not displaying it. The intelligence community's own internal watchdog had reviewed his complaint and found it, quote, credible and urgent, but understand what that label means and what it does not. It means he followed the rules and his concern was serious enough to take seriously. It is not a stamp that says the aliens are real. And still, register what actually just happened. A sworn intelligence officer told the United States Congress, on live television, that his government was hiding dead non-human pilots in a warehouse somewhere, and the elected officials questioning him did not laugh, did not roll their eyes, did not end the hearing. They leaned forward, and they asked him for more. The flood. After that, the gates did not just open. They came off the hinges. In November of 2024, another hearing brought another row of insiders under oath. Luis Elizondo, the man from the original leak, testified that advanced technology, built by no nation on Earth, was actively monitoring sensitive American military installations, and that we did not control our own skies. A retired Rear Admiral testified that an official email containing one of the famous Navy videos had simply vanished from secure government servers. as if someone were quietly scrubbing the record. And an investigative journalist told Congress about an alleged secret program, buried so deep it had its own code name, a program he said existed to quietly collect and quarantine the government's very best UFO data, keeping it out of the hands of the very lawmakers sworn to oversee it, though he admitted he could produce no authenticated documents to prove the program was real. And then the strangeness left the hearing room and arrived over people's houses. That same winter, the night skies over New Jersey and the broader East Coast filled with mysterious lights. For weeks, terrified residents reported thousands of unexplained drones, large ones, car-sized, drifting silently over their towns, their reservoirs, and most alarmingly, over military bases and restricted airspace. Local police were overwhelmed. Governors demanded answers. Members of Congress went on television and admitted they could not get a straight explanation from their own government. For a few weeks, an ordinary American suburb was living inside the exact mystery this whole story is about, staring up at lights in the sky that no authority could or would identify. And then, in February of 2026, came the most astonishing development of all. A sitting president of the United States publicly ordered the Pentagon and the intelligence agencies to begin identifying and releasing the government's secret files on aliens, on extraterrestrial life, and on UFOs. The Secretary of Defense announced that the Pentagon would comply. The office that had been built to study these objects now reported a backlog of more than 2,000 active, unresolved cases, and the number was still climbing. After 70 years of denial, the official position of the United States government was, suddenly, that there were files worth opening. The truth. So this is the part of the story where the believers want me to tell you the case is closed, that the cover-up is proven, that the aliens are as good as confirmed. It is not, and they are not. Because the same government that admitted all of this also did something the 2-hour compilation videos will never show you. It went looking. And what it found should make every honest person on both sides of this deeply uncomfortable. In March of 2024, the new Pentagon office released the results of a sweeping historical review. It had pulled the classified archives going back to 1945, interviewed the insiders, and chased every rumor of recovered craft and hidden hangars all the way to the bottom. Its conclusion was blunt and unsparing. It found no empirical evidence, none, that the United States had ever recovered alien technology, and no evidence that any secret reverse engineering program had ever existed. The belief that it had, the report said, was largely the product of circular reporting, a small and sincere group of people who all believed the same rumor and kept citing one another as proof, with no physical evidence at the bottom of the pile. And David Grusch, the star witness whose testimony had shaken the world, had refused to even speak with the office that was investigating his own claims. No craft was ever produced. No body was ever shown. Not one bolt of non-human metal has ever been placed on a table for the world to see. And the famous videos, the crown jewels of the whole phenomenon? One by one, the government and independent analysts took them apart. The object in the video everyone calls GOFAST, the one that appears to be screaming just above the surface of the ocean, was resolved in 2025 to be drifting lazily at 13,000 feet, moving at little more than the speed of the wind. It only looked impossibly fast because the jet filming it was racing past at hundreds of miles an hour, an optical illusion called parallax that fools your eye every time a nearby fence post seems to fly past a distant mountain. The rotating object in the second video was most likely the infrared glare of a distant jet engine, appearing to spin only because the camera itself was rotating to keep its lock. And the great New Jersey drone panic, the one that emptied people's nerves for a month. Investigators reviewed more than 5,000 reports and concluded in their own words that there was nothing anomalous. Ordinary commercial planes, hobby drones, police helicopters, and in case after case, ordinary stars and planets mistaken for alien craft by frightened people who stared too long at the same point of light. Even the bold law that was supposed to force the entire truth into the open, the one modeled on the records that finally cracked open the Kennedy assassination, had its sharpest teeth, the power to seize recovered craft and force an independent review. quietly stripped out behind closed doors before it ever became law. So here is where we actually stand in the cold light, with the legend finally separated from the fact. The videos are real, but they have credible, earthly explanations. The testimony is sworn and serious, but it is secondhand, and not one piece of it has ever been confirmed with something you could hold in your hand. The government genuinely cannot identify thousands of objects in its own skies, and it insists, just as genuinely, that not one of them is alien. Both of those things are true at the very same time. That contradiction is not a loose end in the story. That contradiction is the whole story. Your verdict, which leaves the only question that actually matters, and it does not belong to me. It belongs to you. There are two ways to read everything you just heard, and they cannot both be right. The first is that the government is sitting on the single biggest secret in human history. That there really are non-human craft in a hangar in the desert, that there really are bodies in cold storage, and that we are being managed, lied to, and slowly, carefully prepared for a truth they have decided we are not ready to handle. The second reading is more mundane, and somehow far more disturbing. That there is no secret at all. That the most powerful military on Earth is being completely honest when it says it simply does not know what keeps appearing over its most guarded bases, and that after 70 years and untold billions of dollars, it still cannot reliably tell the difference between a hostile threat, a hobbyist's toy, and a distant star. So tell me where you stand, because I genuinely want to know. Drop a red circle in the comments if you believe they are hiding something non-human and that the files about to be released will finally prove it. Drop a white circle if you believe it is all glare, parallax, and stories told secondhand, and that those files will reveal nothing but the depth of our own confusion. Pick a side. But before you do, sit for one moment with the question that actually keeps me awake. Which answer scares you more? A government that has aliens and refuses to tell you, or a government that has no idea what is flying over your home and is finally, quietly admitting it? They have now been ordered to open the files. Soon, all of us are going to find out which fear was the right one.